Welcome to the ATX DAO Podcast, the hub for exploring the forefront of blockchain technology in Austin's Web3 community. We connect you with innovators within ATX DAO and beyond as we venture into the world of decentralized technology. So crack open a beer and join us for a front row seat to learn about the innovations and trends shaping our digital future. This is the ATX DAO Podcast. Welcome everyone to the ATX DAO Podcast. We are excited to welcome Ryan Haczynski with us today. He is the head of protocol partnerships at GlobalStake's. Ryan, welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you.
Thanks so much, Luke. Thanks, Ash. I'm really excited to be here and have a great conversation with you guys.
Yeah, no, we're pumped to have you. So really interested in the kind of the work that y'all are doing over at GlobalStake's. So for those that maybe aren't as familiar with what y'all do, I thought we'd just start off with just a quick overview of kind of what GlobalStake's is, what kind of work do y'all do, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So, GlobalStake is, as I like to tell people, an enterprise-grade, institutionally focused, bare metal blockchain infrastructure provider. So we started off just really focused on staking services, right? As many companies often do in the space, doing proof of stake networks and so on and so forth. We've since expanded, and we'll probably get into this in the conversation over the course of our time together, because one of our co-founders actually has a background in mergers and acquisitions. He was a Wall Street lawyer back in the 90s and really focused on M&A. And so as we continue to pick up bits and pieces of distressed assets, we kind of expanded our repertoire. So now we do a lot with, say, decentralized storage, or we're starting to dabble in AI. So a lot of different things too. And one of the key differentiators for us is, of course, we have a SOC 2 Type 2 certification, which is really rare in the industry. As far as I know, we're the only self-hosted and self-managed staking service provider in the entire Web3 space that has earned this distinction so far. Many of the other big boys running on cloud, of course, have the SOC 2, and we only run in Tier 4, Tier 5 SOC 2 certified data centers, or in the case of the EU, ISO 27001. So that's kind of our niche, is just focused to, and we only run fully owned bare metal. We don't rent anything, don't do anything in the cloud, and that's attracting a lot of institutional interest at this point, just for diversification of counterparty risk and stake and so on and so forth.
Very cool. So you had a couple of terms that you mentioned there. So the bare metal and then SOC 2 as well. Do you want to maybe kind of expand a little bit, like the difference? What does it mean to have bare metal, and how does that compare to maybe some other structures you can have out there?
Yeah, sure. So most commonly what we have in the industry today is cloud providers, right? A lot of people who are just wanting to run something, they either have the expertise, but they don't have access to the hardware or the compute, as we like to call it. And so they'll just go to an AWS or a Microsoft, Azure or Google Cloud, and they'll just say, like, I need X parameters. And they just say, my node needs X, Y, or Z, whatever that may be. You talked about maybe running an Avalanche node, for instance, and there's going to be a certain set of parameters that you need to run that particular machine. So many people just go to a cloud provider and they'll just say, I need this. And then what happens is, on the back end, the hyperscaler will just kind of, by a script, automate, it doesn't really care about what kind of server you're going to get. It's just like, okay, these parameters fit this box and there's room in this box. We're just going to throw you in this box. And so that causes all sorts of kinds of other issues, like noisy neighbors, which we could probably touch on too. So the difference with us is we run only bare metal, meaning that it's just literally raw servers that can be like Frankenstein's monster. You can put in different parts and create it however you need. Okay, I maybe need some NVMe here. I want to run this particular GPU. I want to have this particular card on it. And so we have a lot of, the big difference is you can't do anything. If you're using a cloud provider, you have no say over what you're getting in terms of the compute. Whereas with GlobalStake, we have some industry veterans that have been doing this work for decades, literally. And so they have the knowledge to actually build an entire network, go into like a physical data center. We have, for instance, a full cage in one of our locations. And so that way our head of infra goes in there. He actually racks the servers in the cabinets. He does all the cabling. He does all the wiring. But we have the ability to sort of optimize all of the hardware to meet certain specs. We can do things that you just can't do with a cloud provider. And that's kind of what makes us unique. Now, the other part of that, of course, is that SOC 2 Type 2 certification. So SOC 2 in the industry is really well known for big players, the TradFi people who are coming into the space right now. We see the BlackRocks, the Fidelities. Charles Schwab just announced that they're going to be doing and offering crypto services, for instance. So these are the kind of people that are entering the game. They don't want fly-by-night providers. They want certain guarantees. And SOC 2 is really focused on data. And what you're really showing is that your data is completely secure. And to go through the process of getting a SOC 2 Type 2 certification It's a really intense audit. It took us nearly a year to get this achievement. And we had to go through a massive audit. And this includes having people firewalled. For instance, we jokingly call one of the guys I work with the master of wallets. He's literally like the only person besides the co-founders who has access to these private keys. Right. And so even down to the granular details of our CTO might be the only one who can provision the VMs on the actual physical hardware. And then he hands off that VM to his right-hand man who might be doing the actual installs to boot up a particular blockchain and get it running. So SOC 2 just kind of guarantees that you have the highest level of security. And it's just sort of a symbol or a badge that institutional investors know. Like we work with a number of custodians, for instance, and they know, okay, we're getting the highest grade security by operating with GlobalStake.
That's pretty cool. I gotta ask, like, okay, going to bare metal is a really interesting concept, right? Like, I was just wondering, was that something, because you mentioned your founders, like, had this expertise and wanted to do this. And so, but like, most people would go to the cloud. Obviously, making a dent in the cloud requires, there's a huge capital moat that there's there, but also bare metal is like a huge other capital moat. I'm just curious to see why they picked this rather than like, hey, let's go cloud and then do this, or this, then go cloud. Like, why is this your beachhead?
No, this is a great question, Ash. I'm happy to get into this because I can tell you two quick stories that explain sort of the rationale and the history of our co-founders. So they've been into tech for the last 25 years. They started a fund. We were bootstrapped by a VC fund called Silvermine Capital. And one of those, I already mentioned, Wall Street lawyer, his name is Rich, who specialized in M&A. In the early 2000s, he set on a number of telco boards, one of which was actually laying fiber optic cable all up and down the East Coast. Now, you guys are a little younger than me. Like, I'm going to be 50 this year, so you might not remember, but 25 years ago, literally, people thought the internet was going to be a fad. And they used to say, like, why do we need fiber optic cable? This stuff is so expensive. Like, I have my telephone wires and I'm getting on my AOL. What do I need any of this for? So that really was something that happened. And then the dot-com bubble burst. And when this did, this is right around the time they started their fund, and Rich was pounding the table saying, this company, the fiber optic cable that they laid in the ground is worth more than the company itself. This needs to be our first acquisition. So they jump in and they actually buy this company. They've always been in the habit of just sort of coming into a distressed company and providing leadership and capital and then rehabbing it and selling it off to private equity. They don't ever take anything to IPO. They just kind of have this rinse and repeat model, and they're very good at it. And so during this time, we also saw the deregulation of the telco industry. For older folks who are listening, you probably remember a world in which there were many, many, many regional operators, right? Like I grew up around New England Bell, and then there was Southern Bell down south, and so on and so forth. Eventually, all those consolidated into what we now know as AT&T. And there's really just a few providers. So when they started building GlobalStake, they were doing this in a way that they're making a bet on the same thing is going to happen, that all these smaller players are eventually going to be squeezed out. And that gets me to the second part of the story. So they used to have an actual SaaS platform. So back in 2007, 2008, Rich and Tom started this actual business where they were selling generic drugs directly to doctors, and especially like in rural areas where it's difficult for people to get to a pharmacy. And these, of course, as you can imagine, are really low margin products, but they could do so at scale. And they were doing this through AWS. So at the time, they were able to run a business, quite profitably. But again, they were on margins. They had to be thin and be mindful and sell enough at scale to make it work. And that was working for a couple of years. Well, 2010, HIPAA becomes the law of the land. And once it did so, and there was this vast regulatory body that was created all around patient data and what's going to happen and what's important, all of a sudden, Amazon sent them a letter and said, hey, we're moving you to our HIPAA compliant cloud. Even though it was the same exact suite of tools, nothing about what they were running on their back end was different, except it had a nice fancy skin. And it basically said HIPAA compliant cloud. Well, guess what? AWS also 3x the cost overnight. And it put them out of business, and this killed this business. So what they perceived when they were starting to build out GlobalStake, they said, number one, we're going to build this like a telecom, because we're going to build this and be ready for acquisition, because either custodians or banks are going to want to buy a business that's built like a telecom. We have redundancy in power. We have redundancy in our ISPs. We have basically security is set up in such a way like that if something were to go wrong, we have so many fail safes that our nodes will keep running. And having that bare metal plugged in this way gives us an extreme advantage over many of the centralized cloud providers. Moreover, just like what happened with their SaaS platform, what we think is going to happen is as we get that legislative clarity, as we get that regulatory clarity, we're going to see the same consolidation in the industry. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they're going to be like, whoa, there's so much money in blockchain. We need to be getting a bigger cut of this. So they're going to raise prices on top of what are already exorbitant prices, if we're being honest, right? So that's another advantage of running bare metal. We can do things that are so much more cost efficient compared to running on a hyper, because you might be just paying for the box up front, but that doesn't include the bandwidth. So sometimes it almost doubles up your bill right there. And AWS is very familiar with, or has this scheme of sending these like overly ornate bills and structures that you kind of get lost in the sauce about like, what exactly am I being charged for? All I know is I got a big fat bill I got to pay, and I have to make sure that I get this out the door so I can keep my service running. So many of these independent operators in the long run, in the next, say, 3-5 years, are probably going to be squeezed out because they won't be able to afford to run on a hyperscaler. Now, to your point, there's also the CapEx, right? Like that's a huge other issue. So coming out of COVID, we already saw these long lines in terms of waiting to get any kind of semiconductors, right? That's gotten a little bit better since probably as we were starting to scale up in 23. I joined the company in 22. I was one of the first hires. And so that started to get a little bit better. Procurement time has gotten a little bit better, but there's still a lag for us when you're buying physical hardware. You have to wait for it to come in, then you have to test it. Our head of Infra, he's been doing this for so long. He bench tests everything, makes sure it's good to go. Then he racks it in the cabinet, does all the cabling and makes sure it's hooked up. Then he does more testing. So there's also the OpEx involved. So in one sense, it's more expensive up front. But when it comes to actually the depreciation of the equipment and it starts paying for itself very quickly, like for instance, really good example. Sometimes when a network goes nuts, we make a lot of money, right? When the Trump coin dropped on Solana, apparently we made so much SOL just from our SOL validator that one 48-hour period, it almost paid for the server itself, like that. So it's really kind of interesting place to be, but that kind of gives you the idea of why they built it the way they did. I want to give a shout out, especially to our head of infra. We call him TK. He's been doing this work for decades. He actually built Match.com. The dating website? He built the very first network of Match.com. So this guy, we have data center veterans who have been building these things from the ground up. One of our guys used to work for the Department of Defense. So we have we're a bunch of older guys. There's very few younger people on our team. There's a couple that are in their 30s, but like most of us are probably late 40s and older. So in fact, just a last quick anecdote, when I was at ETH Denver, it was funny. One of the heads of a protocol, Kenny from Manta, he was saying like, oh, back in the 90s, we used to do this thing called co-location and data centers. He's like, I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about. And I'm like, nodding. He's like, see, the old guy knows. And I was like, what? Like, I'm the old guy now? What the hell? So yeah, it's been an interesting ride, but that kind of gives you the backstory and the rationale for why we're building GlobalStake the way that we are.
No, I mean, that's really interesting. It's also been interesting that you mentioned Silvermine, right? Like, because I know that they are also like a VC that's quite active in this space. And it's interesting that they came from that route. And also the fact that he was like, dude, hard assets. Like, this is a thing that is very important. And it's now basically extended into this idea of going to bare metal. And then seeing that liminal space clearly where it's like, hey, there's a big problem here. And it's like, I have to solve this problem for myself and for others, which is, kind of very unique. It's like, that's how many startups kind of begin, right? It's like, you get fucked. And then it's like, I need to do something about this. And who better to do it than me? Because I have the motivation to just do this because it just axed my business. I think that's kind of cool. I got to ask another question about this though. Like, you mentioned like the Solana validator that just basically made so much money for you during the Trump coin thing, right? Like, how does that, and probably I'm just jumping all over the place over here, but like, I got to ask, like, when I go to the website, I see that you guys have so many chains that you're working with. It's insane. I wonder, how do you guys think about like, okay, this is the next performant L1 and like, this is what we're going to support? Or is it like, they just come to you and they say, hey, Ryan, like, you're a mensch, like, dude, we are running this. We need someone who's going to run validators and all this infra for it. Do you want to do this? Like, how does that conversation or that thesis work?
I wish it were that easy, and I'm very grateful for the fact that you called me a mensch. But I just want to say, like, so basically when we started building out what we wanted to do is demonstrate our ability to run many things. So at one point we had up to 56 chains going because we had so much hardware that we wanted to just kind of spin up whatever we could get our hands on, just to demonstrate that we had the breadth of technical competency. Because a lot of times what you see is that many people just focus on a particular ecosystem or just a few chains. Now on the custodial and institutional side, like, yeah, that's the case, right? Like for the most part, they're focused on boot up my ETH validators. I want to stake a bunch of Solana. Like they're focused more on the higher end of the chart, right? But when we started, originally our CTO and me myself, like I kind of came from the Polkadot ecosystem back in 2020. COVID happens. I kind of really fell in love with the vision of interoperability. I thought that was going to be the future, just knowing that blockchains would need to talk to each other over time. And of course, Cosmos and Polkadot were the only two doing that. I just kind of sided more. I mean, I still have many friends in Cosmos too, but I just leaned toward Polkadot because of Gavin Wood. Gavin Wood obviously was the original CTO on Ethereum. He's the one who wrote the yellow paper. He's the one who basically designed Ethereum and realized, okay, this isn't going to scale, so let me figure out a new way to do things. And it's funny how we've gotten to this point where ETH, where we have all these L2s and these roll-ups, and that's what Polkadot was doing back in like 2022. So he's always been ahead of the curve in that regard. And so like that's how the I guess the nucleus of our company was born, because we all had known each other from the Polkadot ecosystem. And because you have to run multiple chains anyhow, we already demonstrated a little bit of that. So we started then by January of 23, we started running Cosmos chains. And then we started just kind of continue to branch out. We started running Avalanche nodes. We started running like the Gogo pool version of Avalanche, which if you guys are familiar with like Rocket Pool on ETH, right? If you don't have the whole amount, you can use the Gogo pool for Avalanche. And we just kept like compounding and more just kept coming. Now, as we pivoted more toward and started having those conversations with custodians and people were taking interest more on the institutional side, that's when we said, okay, we need to get like a Solana validator up. We need to, I think we run, I don't know how many ETH nodes right now, but somewhere 75 to 100 or something like ETH validators. ETH is a very light touch. It's kind of older tech. So it's, even with that proof of stake after the merger in the beacon chain, you can run multiple nodes on a single VM or single instance, but you don't want to do that either because they talk about blast radius. You want to be safe and you want to kind of have more nodes in different boxes and so on and so forth. So it really was it's kind of an organic approach to how we wanted to demonstrate our ability to run basically anything that could come our way. Now, what that has brought about is in conversations, to your point, Ash, like people look at that page and like, wow, these guys run a bunch of different things. They probably can run pretty much anything. And now we're getting to these super performant type things, whether it's Mega ETH as an L2 or just recently we're now been talking to, and it seems like we're going to be one of the people running Somnia. And Somnia is doing like 1 million TPS or something as a gaming focused chain. And it's because we've demonstrated that we have the technical chops to actually run these things, and the fact that more and more, especially the builders of these architects of the chains, they really appreciate bare metal because they understand that these things can be optimized in a way that you just really can't do by using a cloud provider. So that's, I think, also getting us a lot of buy-in and a lot of traction, is just knowing that we come to meetings and we say, hey, we've got 25 plus years of experience across our various, domains, that everybody has a certain amount of expertise in doing X, Y, or Z. And I think going back to what you were saying earlier with like Silvermine, this is also just part of our co-founders being very much like a Wayne Gretzky, right? Like they skate to where the puck is going, because why they pivoted to blockchain away from just sort of Web 2 tech, and they still have some Web 2 like portfolio companies, but they sold a podcast company to iHeartMedia at the tail end of 2019, COVID starting. And then Rich is like, this blockchain stuff, that's next. Like we need to figure out a way to build the picks and shovels to do that kind of play and build some infrastructure. And again, just going back to those telecom roots, they thought everybody's doing stuff on the cloud. This seems too easy. This is going to cause problems. We need to figure out how to do this on bare metal and then really need to just kind of get out there and show we can run anything. Throw us any challenge and we'll run it. And then that led to us getting into other verticals, right? Like beyond just doing staking services. Like Arweave, for instance, is a great example where we went to them and they came to, we were just talking to them because we had all this storage. I met them at ETH Denver back in 24. And the next thing you know, we're having a conversation with Sam Williams. Again, we had besides like mining some Filecoin, which is a radically different proposition, we had nothing to do with storage before this. We just said like, hey, we got 145 petabytes. And he was like, tell me about the petabytes. And so we go into this meeting, we talk to them, and our head of infra, TK, is so good. Within a couple of months of just like trying to mine some Arweave, because it's actually like built a lot along the lines of what Bitcoin was, and it is a kind of proof of work with the way it packs weaves, but it uses CPUs to process all the data. And so what's interesting is TK looked at the head engineer, James, in one of the meetings a couple months into our relationship, and he said, did you build this on a laptop? I don't think you ever thought about what this looks like at scale. And he's like, well, yeah, when we designed Arweave, it was 2018. Like, we didn't really think about what this would look like on big, powerful servers. And he's like, may I make some suggestions to the code? And he's like, yeah, tell me what you think is going to happen. Because at this point, no one could pack a full weave. You needed 3-4 miners, each running at about 50 to 60% hash rate efficiency with their CPUs to actually come together and create a full weave. So he talks to James. James makes some tweaks, puts it in the sandbox, and we were the very first company to run a solo miner at 98% hash rate efficiency and pack a full weave off that. That led to a strategic partnership with Arweave. They actually, for research, the parent foundation invested in GlobalStake. And so not only do we have roughly 20% of the hash rate on all of Arweave now, and it's because we run a bunch of miners for ourselves, but also for Arweave, for the foundation. They said, we just need the AR token to continue to fund our operations. We'll pay you guys cash. You just surrender all the AR tokens to us and run, I forget how many it is, like 20 dedicated miners. So what started off as like, hey, let's show anybody what we can run, has now really morphed into getting us, to your point, Ash, like many other opportunities that we never would have foresaw before. And it's just really interesting. But like, to your point, I really wish it were as easy as people coming up and be like, hey, you're the GlobalStake dude. Can you run our stuff? Like, that would be amazing.
Well, it's I say this because like it's really funny. When we met, we were also talking about my brief stint in Polkadot, right? And building there, right? And like Polkadot's hub and spoke model is like a fantastic model, right? You're right. Gavin was ahead of the curve. And this is like L2s were just on the edge where they were talking about like, oh, we need to get Arbitrum and Optimism up and like roll-ups and all this stuff. And ZK rollups, right? Which that now we're living in that era, and it's also like kind of fading because people are like, "Is this value extractive or not?" Which is a separate question altogether. The thing is like it's really funny. Like I think Cosmos, and I look at your website, and I notice all the Polkadot stuff. I see Akala over there, front and center. I see Astar, Basilisk, Avail. All these, or like I remember these projects from during my Polkadot time. So I'm happy to see them on there. But with Cosmos, it's really interesting. I felt like and this is just my observation, but it also makes sense why you went to Polkadot and Cosmos. And I feel like Cosmos' whole thesis was that you have to ship the whole cow. It's a very crude way of saying that business logic would say that like, hey, you're building on a protocol level, you have a dedicated chain, you should go to your infra level and have dedicated specialized infra depending on what you're building. Super smart. Problem is, like, I was like, well, what if I don't know any infra stuff like over there? I just want to build on the protocol level and the front end level. So it's really interesting that like opens up the door for like these modular expertise or these knowledge centers around like, we do dedicated infra on this and we can then customize this. And it's cool to see that like if your Arweave, your vignette of that approach where it's like, hey, we can just improve this to make it like run a little bit better, considering we've actually know on the infra side of things. There might be some things that you probably missed here. And that's kind of unique. And I'm glad to see that you guys have this like two-way relationship with people that would come that way, right? I'd imagine that grows naturally because this era of like people doing performant L1s, I don't think is stopping. right? And whether it's required or not required, I don't know. But like, I think that having people like think that they know everything is just not the reality. So having someone who's like, dude, you have a domain knowledge expertise in like bare metal staking, we understand infra, we can try and maybe optimize certain things to like break it up and make it more realistic and scalable for you is kind of cool. But it is really funny. I would have thought that just shipping the whole cow thesis on Cosmos would have made it be like there's more modularity so you can like pick and match and do all kinds of other things. But yeah, that was not the case, I guess. But yeah.
I think what we've seen too in the space over the last, especially 2 or 3 years, is for one, there's an infra glut, right? Like there's just too many blockchains. And I think too, where we thought 4 years ago that having these independent app chains that would do one specific function would be sort of a killer use case, but it's really not. I mean, I love the architecture of both, right? Like to your point, Ash, like with Cosmos, you need to run a separate relayer, right? To pass back and forth the actual like messages over IBC, which if anything else, like that became sort of the actual value add from Cosmos is IBC because it's used in other places even beyond the Cosmos ecosystem because it is such a wonderful message passing protocol. And I think that whereas that's baked into Polkadot, right? Like because you have XCM, it just so it works a little bit different. You don't have to run a separate relayer. You look at Solana, you look at the success of that, right? Like it seems as if the general purpose, L1, especially if it's scalable and fast. I mean, that's argumentative whether or not like Fire Dancer and stuff's going to improve some of these things on Solana in that particular case, right? It seems to be the thing. Like Avalanche, I think is still doing well, even though it's still kind of somewhere between a Cosmos and a Polkadot with the subnet model and whatnot. But, it tends to be a general purpose, L1. People don't realize that they're probably running or using subnets or anything else like that. They just think like, oh, I'm using Avalanche. So I think over time, we're starting to see how like these, or now it's just become about specific environments, right? Like, so EVM was sort of the gold standard from it. There's so many libraries and tooling and everything, Solidity is really well known. But now Rust has sort of become the go-to language because it's so much more secure. Many blockchains, even Polkadot, as down at the base layer is built on Rust. And so we're seeing that again and again, like with Solana, or now the Move stuff, right? Like the Move language that really was born out of the now defunct Facebook project of Libra and Diem, which then split into Aptos and Sui. And the story goes that Aptos got all the marketing and BD people, and Sui took all the engineers and the real devs. And it seems like all of my friends who are devs love Sui for that reason, because it's all like the giga nerds are over there, and Aptos is just like slick. Hey, look, our chain is fast, but no one really uses it. Whereas Sui's obviously got a lot of traction. So I think in the end, what's going to happen is regardless of what L1 people are using, the holy grail we all know and are waiting for are light clients. Like once we have the ability to have light clients just talk to other chains, we're not going to need message passing and so on and so forth. I think when I talk about where this is all going, like for instance, I was in Tallahassee and talking to legislators, and they don't understand blockchain. They don't understand Web3 as a term. And I just tell them like, what is being built right now underneath our feet is a new, more secure internet. And I mean, look at the way that stablecoin payments and the proliferation of those and how that's taking over. I mean, that will become the de facto standard because it's so much more secure than, and it's certainly a lot faster, right? And you don't even need an intermediary. Like I could just be like, oh, Luke, hey, here's some money. And you got it in a couple seconds, right? And we can do all these things peer-to-peer. So there are some parts of sort of the cypherpunk ethos that started with blockchain, many years ago with Bitcoin back in 2009 that are now coming to the fore. And then, of course, there are people who are getting all like angsty over the fact that like, oh, the cypherpunk ethos is dead because like the TradFi boys are here to take over. And I know, sorry, we're going on the tangent, but
no. I mean, I think this perfectly segues to the next question. Like, I'm pretty sure, like Luke wrote this good question list, right? And but just because you laid this, it's like you're just throwing it up there. I'm just going to alley-oop it to you. Like, we're going into this institutional era. We're going to this era where, like, the Cosmos and Polkadot thing is really interesting, right? Because then you run infra for several places with the IBC, you're doubling down. Now, obviously, we know the closer things are together, the quicker, a synapse can fire, right? It's just that neural firing is just going to be better. Is there a worry about decentralization when you're running bare metal. And I know you guys have several locations, but like, for an institution, they might not really care. But for blockchains, like they definitely do care. So I just wonder, are you thinking about decentralization in terms of validator infrastructure, and like how do you go about fragmenting it purposefully or aggregating it into such a way that like, hey, it's the best of both worlds, or we have this happy medium? And this isn't a hard question, and maybe that's some of the secret sauce of Global Stake about why you guys are special. But generally, just like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that it's a perfect way to think about how we're approaching it. Insofar as, I guess, in some sense, we are decentralization maxis, right? Like we have a goal to be on every habitable continent by the end of next year. Right now, we have two continents, three locations, right? So we have a full cage in DC, in Washington, DC. We have co-location data centers. Of course, our West Coast deployment is in Phoenix. So we have a data center there in Phoenix that has a single cabinet, and we have a single cabinet in Amsterdam for our EU location. To your point, whether it's the blockchain or the institutional ask, now we have the ability to position where you need us to be. I'll give you a case in point. Started running EVMOS, right? That's like the basic EVM and Cosmos for those who are listening and don't know, right? We could not hit all our blocks. It was just impossible. And we were like scratching our heads because we're like, we're professionals. How the heck is this happening? I don't understand why we can't be hitting all our blocks. We were only hitting like 88% of the blocks. I started talking to some Cosmos validators and they're like, where are you located? And I said, East Coast US. I'm like, just shut it down. You'll never get, like, they're so highly agglomerated. Now, this is also sort of the irony of our industry because we talk about decentralization as if it's so important. But what ends up happening a lot of times is that because so many people are running either in the cloud or on a rented server, like Hetzner or OHV, well, guess where all those are? Western Europe. And so many of these blockchain protocols, because they wanted to stay away from the United States because of the murkiness of like, oh, the US is against crypto back in the day, they all plunked down in Europe. And because of latency, all of these peers, they're pinging each other, they're all really close. So now we have the ability to say like, oh, you need something in Europe? Boom, we just spin up a VM in one of the boxes in the EU, in Amsterdam. I mean, if we can, we'll run it out of our main location because we have that full cage. So it's just a lot easier to do those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, we're also scouting locations for next is going to be South America, the Middle East, and APAC. And then eventually we'll get to probably Africa after that. And we know Australia will be dead last because it is prohibitively expensive to run both power and bandwidth. And those are the two biggest costs for us running bare metal, those two in particular. And so we're approaching it both in a physical and philosophical sense. Like we want to have a data center. And so this kind of speaks to both the blockchain team side as well as the institutional side. From the blockchain's team side, they might say like, hey, in fact, we just had a conversation with a team that shall not be named, but not that they're Voldemort, but like, you know what I mean? Like, I just can't share the information. Brand new hot team, blah, blah, blah. And they said, we want to be in the Middle East. And it's like, we don't have a data center yet, but we're already scouting locations. And they're like, we'll help make it happen. And so, because of our offering and because of our USP, that has now got us to the point where we can have those kinds of conversations with people because they realize, okay, these dudes are serious players. They're only running their own infrastructure. So we know that they're going to really have that hands-on approach that we can't necessarily guarantee with somebody who's using a hyperscaler. And then more importantly, they can kind of tell us we need a location here, and they can point to something on the map. And if we're not exactly there, we're pretty close. And so usually because of the hardware that we run, we are already, and the types of data centers that we're in, we're already minimizing latency because of the speed of the ISP in the region and in the data center and so on and so forth. So that's one part of it. Now, on the institutional side, we also can give sort of that granularity that they may be looking for, because it may be something as, well, we only want to be in your main one in Washington, D.C. You guys have a full cage. You have a ton of compute here. That way, if we know we need to scale up, we can easily add more servers. Whereas the others, you're going to have to ship them, because a lot of times, like when we built out our Amsterdam presence, we had everything here in the U.S. Everything had to be benchmarked. Everything had to be tested. Then, of course, like TK, our head of Infra, he packs it all up, puts it all on a pallet, wraps it all up, sends it off to be shipped across on a cargo ship. Then it gets over there. He flies out to Amsterdam. He puts it all on the rack and stuff like that. So again, we run into that bumpiness of the procurement time in terms of getting set up. So setting up a new data center is somewhat intense. But once we're there, then we have the option for both the teams who say like, hey, I need to, or like going back to the West Coast, we've had teams that say specifically to us, like, we're trying to distribute our nodes globally. Like Solana is doing a great job with this. Their foundation, they are really trying hard because most of Solana is right now running in Western Europe, shocker, or US East Coast, right? And so because of that, what we're seeing is now they're doing a very good job, the foundation, to say like, we need to distribute the stake to other parts of the globe so that we have a greater decentralized presence. So I think the blockchain teams are keenly aware of that. I also think from the institutional side, many of these clients, whether it's our custodians and their clients or just like the institutions themselves, they're looking to actually diversify counterparty risk. So it might even be a situation or a case of, we're not going to give everybody all of our stake. You know, it's great that you guys are bare metal, but still, like, it would be great if we could give you a third of our stake and we want to split up. We want some to be on this node. We want some to be on that node. And then that way they can also help with the decentralization of any given network by being able to kind of tell us, we want this much of Solana here, we want this much of Solana tokens at this location. You know, that's kind of how both, I think, are feeding into the decentralization. And if nothing else, at the end of the day, the example I give people all the time who know nothing about decentralization is when you think about the risks of centralization and what kind of havoc that causes, it really is an eye-opener. The go-to example I've been using ever since like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, whatever it was, when CrowdStrike pushed that one update that like all of a sudden every Windows computer in the world had the blue screen of death, Delta Airlines could not operate, so on and so forth. Because when you rely on a single provider to do something, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure CrowdStrike is an incredible cybersecurity platform, but when you have one central provider that runs everything, that's what happens is you have a lack of resilience, a lack of robustness, and you know, the world is going to a place where we're going to need it. And I think that's the one thing that we hope that it's going to continue to remain alive. We're doing our part in terms of the physical infrastructure and trying to make sure that it is spread out all over the globe.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's such an interesting balance, right? Like, because it's like, I guess it's because it's like a huge capital investment from you guys, because it's like, hey, I actually have to put like literally boots on the ground to ship this. So we got to make sure they're really thinking ahead, and we have partners over here who are going to use this compute and this data. Yeah, it's because like I feel like building on the app layer, like where I feel comfortable, I feel like it's a lot of it's just ethereal, right? Like it's just in the air. I don't really have to think about the hard things that are there. That's like, you know, hardware is the quickest way to lose $100 million, right? So like, I really have that like echoing through my mind all the time when I think about it. So it's like, it takes balls of steel to do that fucking business. I feel like there's a lot more quantitative reasoning and grounding for it. But like, I just feel like the capital cost to play in that game is like, holy shit, you know, it's high stakes when you sit on that table. So yeah.
Well, this is a good reason for probably why the very first person who was recruited is Giga Chad David Chapman, who is former Goldman Sachs, former Deloitte before that. Incredibly young, one of the sharpest financial minds I've ever met in my life. And he is one of the co-founders, technically of GlobalStake, but he's also an investment partner at Silvermine. And so he is one who is always crunching the numbers. Like he'll tell me, we'll run anything as long as the numbers make sense. And in the case, to your point, Ash, thinking about, for instance, this team that we met, this is like, we want to be located specifically in the Middle East. You know, we were already kind of doing some back of the napkin math. Like, okay, well, to make a Solana validator node work, we need at least like 400,000 SOL, you know, before we can get additional delegations, and then it's going to make it profitable to pay for the hardware. Because Solana is a beast. Like, I mean, it is a straight up beast. You need a badass computer to run that thing. And then to your point, it's very finicky in getting it set up and everything else. And a lot of times, some operators just like, oh, just get better hardware. That's like their solution. Just get better hardware. And it's already expensive to run a box, right, with Solana. Whereas our head of infra is like, no, we're going to figure this out. We're going to just keep iterating and figure out how to optimize with the hardware that we have to make sure that we can run it. And so sometimes we've even been able to run the latest and greatest chain with a computer that might be considered old, right? Because it's like a year or two behind in specs. But because of the ability to actually And this gets down to the brass tacks of like, okay, how can we run this as economically and as efficiently as possible in an optimized way that's going to get yields for our clients that they're going to be happy with. And so all this gets fed into sort of that computational model around, how much do we need to be in location X versus location Y and everything else. But yeah, you're spot on.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, yeah, dude, like I have a feeling I already know what the thing is. I feel like I know this. I don't want to say it because I think I know exactly the company that you're talking about, but I am super excited for you and the company as well. I mean, I just think it's a good push in that direction. It makes a lot of sense. And yeah, but I got to ask also about Bitcoin and Babylon, right? You're a finality provider, are you not, at Babylon, if I understand that correctly?
We will be shortly. Today is actually the day. So the way Babylon started is they had a 2-week whitelisting period where they allowed only those finality providers to be running. So today is the day. In fact, I need to probably, after our chat, check in with my guy and be like, hey, is our finality provider up and running? Because we've had great conversations with the Babylon team. We're working very closely with our partner at Ledger Enterprise. I, in fact, introduced Ledger Enterprise to Babylon because what's happening now, just broadly speaking, if we take a step back away from Babylon, there's all this Bitcoin out there, right? Bitcoin is worth so much at this point. It is the de facto digital asset of our space, right? Like, I mean, I think it's worth like a third or maybe even close to 2/3 of the market capitalization for all digital assets. And it's really capitally inefficient, right? And at the end of the day, because we have these big institutional players coming into the space, they want to hear that magic word. And that magic word is yield. How do we earn yield? How can I put this asset to work? I mean, even you're not happy enough that it's like the best performing asset in the last 20 years or whatever, but still so what's happening is all of these different solutions. And what's really interesting is we had Professor David Say from Babylon on our podcast during season 3. And some of the unintended consequences of the things that have erupted from Babylon, they didn't even have in their design. When they started Babylon, it was literally all about the time stamping, this element of we can connect a proof of stake network, like Babylon's the first one to do it, but others are going to do this too, where we'll have the light client talking to a Bitcoin node, and it's just recording the timestamp at whatever blockhead for Bitcoin. Okay, all this batch of all these because Bitcoin only happens every 10 minutes, right? Whereas you can run a typical POS chain on a Cosmos for every 3 seconds or something. If you think about how across that 10 minutes, you'd have hundreds of blocks in the Cosmos chain, what it's doing is then it's time stamping that. Like at this head, all these transactions happened. And so they start off with just the time stamping. Then they worked on the staking piece. And when they did the staking, that was to create what was called a BSN, a Bitcoin secured network, to kind of now it connects the two, right? So before, when they were just doing it in testnet, whoop-de-doo, you have a number showing up in your hash overall that shows okay, at this Bitcoin head, this is what's happening. But you have to put economic security behind that, right? You have to have something slashable. You have to put up, economic risk, if you will, to make this whole concept valuable. So staking was the next thing they rolled out. What they did not anticipate, however, was that Babylon would become sort of like an eigenlayer of Bitcoin, because now you have all these LSTs, these liquid staking tokens, where whether it's Lombard or Solve or these others are like, oh, wait a minute, we can stake Bitcoin. Now we can take and make a derivative of a liquid staking token of Bitcoin and then use that in DeFi. And of course, this opens up all sorts of use cases. And now what we're calling BTCFi. And it's such a slept on aspect of DeFi. I think the TradFi boys are the ones that are figuring this out the fastest. So because they have so much capital, whether it's Ledger Enterprise or our other custodial partner in BitGo, these people literally have tens of billions of dollars of Bitcoin, many of whom are asking, how do I put this Bitcoin to work so I can get that extra bit of yield, even if it's 4%? When you're dealing with big numbers of Bitcoin, especially people who are whales that maybe have hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars. If they want to stake that and get some sort of return that's going to juice their already amazing return because of the volatility of Bitcoin, which we know is going to smoothen out, right? Like, I mean, the asset is aging. You kind of look along a logarithmic chart. Like, people were all like, oh, we're at the top when we hit like 108. I'm like, I don't think so. Like, you look along the log chart, like, I don't think this was even like full on bull mode yet. It was like the warm up. And I also think cycles are sort of lengthening. But getting back to the point about yield, so Babylon, I think, has that first mover advantage. It's going to have sort of a network effect. And yes, we're already running a validator. So if you have baby tokens you want to stake, anybody who's watching or listening, certainly put those on GlobalStake. And we will have a Finality provider as well. And what that does is Babylon's architecture is created in such a way that 8% of the baby token is actually used to pay out the yield. 4% goes to the stakers who are actually securing the Cosmos chain. 4% goes to the Finality providers. And the Finality providers, basically you stake Bitcoin to the actual network, to the Babylon network, and then you delegate that to a Finality provider because you're basically saying, like, I'm going to trust that this person is never going to mess up. You know, we've had a lot of experience running these kinds of Bitcoin infrastructure plays. In fact, Silvermine Capital, our Web3 VC fund that bootstrapped us, they're huge into this space. They've done a lot of investment in Bitcoin infrastructure because they feel that a lot of this is very, very early, and that we're at a good place to be making these kinds of investments because we know that, I mean, I think the number is something crazy, like 0.3% of Bitcoin is used in DeFi, and it's 30% of ETH is used in DeFi. So it's like 100x opportunity in terms of Bitcoin just being able to come in and be used to create yield. And there's many other protocols beyond Babylon. There's Core and some others too, Acre. There's a number of them out there that are continuing to build these solutions. So we're happy to eventually, what we foresee in our strategy is to kind of curate choices for our custodial clients and say, okay, how much yield do you want to earn on your Bitcoin? And then how risky do you want to get? Because obviously, if something staking on Babylon is pretty safe, but over time, those economics are going to decline, right? You're using an inflationary token, baby, to pay out the yield. Now, the one thing that's also interesting about Babylon is because it's connecting to other chains that are going to become part of that Bitcoin secured network, or, you know, those BSN chains. Osmosis, for instance, which is the biggest DEX and the app chain in Cosmos, has just recently signed on and is going to be a BSN. And we have others too. The one that I like playing around with that I've been just doing some Bitcoin DeFi on is with Bob, Build on Bitcoin, which is the old Interlay team, which I'm sure you recognize that name, Ash, because they built originally in Polkadot but they couldn't really scale that over collateralized vault model. So they're doing all the stuff with BitVM. I mean, just the whole Bitcoin space right now is at a really interesting inflection point. And what's crazy to me is that so few people are paying attention. I think most people are so focused on DeFi, still on ETH to an extent, or the L2s maybe more so, definitely on Solana. And I think there's a good DeFi hub that's being built on Sui. And then, of course, the one that's kind of sucking all the oxygen out of the room right now is Hype, right? Like, I mean, Hyperliquid has become sort of the darling. And you can even apparently trade native Bitcoin there. So we're seeing all of these different infrastructure players that are creating different ways to tap into Bitcoin's liquidity. And so we love working with Babylon. They're a great team. We're looking forward to, and I hope, you know, by the time this airs, I'm sure our Finality provider will be live because, like I said, we're recording on the day that it became the permissionless opened up for us to run a Finality provider. But we have so much experience doing a lot of these Bitcoin infrastructure plays. Like Interlay, we were running 5 vaults. We were the Interlay preferred vault provider for that team just because we have so much experience. And some of our LPs are some pretty old school Bitcoin whales that are like, oh, you need some Bitcoin to boot something up? Here you go. You know, and it's just, it's crazy.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense with the institutional focus, right? Like, and yeah, you're right, 100%. A lot of people are sleeping on Bitcoin DeFi. And it makes a lot of sense in like why people want to do this. I mean, it has the digital gold kind of thesis. Now the question is like, can we use the financial instrumentation to expand on this digital gold, right? So it becomes the base layer. And I think it's pretty cool. I mean, I see, you know, Babylon's future looks pretty promising, and providing infra for it and being a Finality provider and building on it does make a lot of sense. I think they've been also, it's like they've been working for a long time too. So I think that their cycle to come due will be pretty soon. I feel like it's going to be when this cycle starts. I think that they will be one of the things that really pops on the Bitcoin side for sure. And Bob and Alexi and the guys, like, BitVM and all that stuff is going to have its moment too. And I think it's going to be quite cool.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how all this plays out, honestly, over the next few years, because I think it's just so early. And that's the thing too, like, you guys have been around long enough to where we've seen significant change in the industry over the years. But at the end of the day, like, it's still very novel. Like, most people, you talk to an average person on the street, they have no idea what you're talking about. But just, it was the same thing with the internet, right? Like, I mean, when I first got on the internet, like 1995, like 30 years ago, it was like a glowing magazine. Like, you couldn't do anything with it. You couldn't interact. Like, I had my first chat room experience was with, I'm dating myself. I was going to say I'm almost 50. But like on Prodigy. You guys don't even probably remember Prodigy. It was like,
I don't even know what that is.
Luke,
I know
my man remembers Prodigy.
Yeah. I thought that was a band or something.
You guys will appreciate this.
Band?
My very first screen name, you'll appreciate this. My very first screen name was Frank Rizzo.
Nice.
From the Jerky Boys. And that was back in the day where you could claim names that, like, people were like, what? Who the hell is Frank Rizzo? Frank Rizzo!
Yeah. I remember. I was in college when, like, the internet became like a big thing, and so, like, we'd go to the computer lab and use like Yahoo Chat or whatever it was. Like, there were chat rooms, and you would just meet people, and it was kind of funny because that's kind of what Discord is now. But that was what we had at the time.
Dude, I am much more of a Discord guy than a Telegram guy. I've gotten accustomed to Telegram because I need to use it, right? Because everybody does Telegram for business and stuff and crypto. But at first I was like, no, Discord's my speed. It's like chat rooms and or message boards from the early internet when everything's organized. I got channels. I know where to find stuff. Telegram's just like all frenetic and crazy.
For sure. But hey, I wanted to ask, so you talked a little bit about the partnership that y'all have with Ledger. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about that, but then also, like, what type of clients do y'all have? Is it mostly institutional where, like, if I'm staking through Ledger, then I can access you? Or if I'm a solo staker, am I also able to work with you that way?
No, that's a great question, honestly, because Luke, what's crazy is with the integration for Ledger Enterprise, we actually, by downstream default, are also going to be in Ledger Live. Like, if you go into Ledger Live and you're staking Solana, for instance, now obviously the target audience is always going to be those institutional clients, right? The fund admins for a family office or a hedge fund or what have you that are staking a lot of they're custodying their assets with Ledger Enterprise or with BitGo, or very soon going to be onboarded to Anchorage Digital. And those are like the three biggest names in the space. But as a retail user, yes, absolutely. You should be able to go into your Ledger Live and, okay, I'm going to stake 100 Sol. What validator do I want to choose? Yes, you could, on the drop down, you will see GlobalStake's. So that's the nice thing about being integrated at the enterprise level, is that the downstream effect is we also appear on the retail stuff. And so that's probably, I don't think it'll be the focus immediately because we're still trying to just, again, target those larger holders. But in the end, I mean, as we continue to grow as a company, I'm sure, when we have more marketing dollars, for instance, or advertising, there might be a place where we'd be like, hey, stake your blah, blah, blah on your Ledger Live. So yes, I mean, that it does kind of cover both, which is really nice and something that I didn't expect necessarily, but it's really kind of cool that you have access to both.
That's awesome. And then you mentioned also the partnership you all with GoGoPool, which I'm very familiar with them. I've actually interviewed Steven on previous podcasts and stuff. So they have a couple of things that they do. So they have like a one-click validator that you can set up. You can also set your own up as well. And they recently did a thing where they launched an Avalanche L1 called Cocknet, which Ash and I talk about the Cocky New token quite a bit. So really some cool things that they're doing there. Like, for example, with a group like them, how do y'all integrate with someone like them?
That was something that I didn't have a hand in actually, like, bringing to the table, if you will. I think at the time we were already running an Avalanche node, and David met some of the guys from GoGoPool. And I remember listening to a space on X with them and just like understanding what it is and how it worked, where I think you just needed to have half, because the bare minimum, for those who are listening and don't know, like, you need 2,000 AVAX is the minimum to run a node. And then I think it goes up to a certain cap, and then you can only have like 5X of whatever you're running on your node. But like for GoGoPool, what's really cool is that, they just kind of pool together the rest of the AVAX that you need, and then you're just deploying half the amount. So I think 1,000 AVAX. I don't know if the numbers have changed. Maybe you can do it for even less.
That's exactly right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. So yeah, and then so again, I think why we ended up running a Google Pool node was just sort of, it was early in our evolution where we were just trying to deploy as many different, like we also were running Rocket Pool as well as running, full ETH nodes. So it was just sort of an organic part of our evolution. And so far as David met them, he liked the whole concept. It was crazy too, because when he told me about it, I just, for whatever reason, I decided to just ape into some of the GoGo token. And it's actually up from where I bought it. So I'm like, hey, cool. It's worth more money now. So yeah, I mean, it seems like, and I like those solutions too, because you can get some of the smaller holders who are maybe interested in running infrastructure with, and they have that easy, like you said, that one-click deployment. I think the more that we can do that and offer those kinds of services, or if people like GoGoPool are offering those services, that gets back to Ash's point about just helping decentralize the network, right? Like, I mean, I think one of his talks somewhat recently, even, I know the Pectra upgrade's coming for ETH, and that will allow up to 2048 ETH to run a validator, but even Vitalik was talking about the importance of home stakers. And I know you guys can't see it, but like I had that dream myself. And over here, I have an Avado cloud that I got like at the tail end of 2020. And I had this grand ambition of like, I'm going to run a Polkadot node, or I'm going to run, I forget what else I could run on ETH, because I had ETH, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll run an ETH node. And then I saw it was still a little too technical, because it's like, you got to go into the like into the box, and you got to do this for creating keys and like stuff that my CTO deals with. And I was like, I just have a Bitcoin node running on that thing now, just contributing to the network. It doesn't do anything other than just like keeps the node going. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. Glad more people are doing that kind of stuff with the one-click solution.
So with the institutional stuff, right, and going TradFi, I gotta ask, what do you think is the craziest prediction of someone in TradFi who's going to enter the market? Like really left curve. You'll just be like, holy shit, like I never even thought about it, like, but they're coming in, boys. Or you think that they're going to come in. You don't have to share anything that is, I just want to know your personal opinion on it. I'm just curious.
Berkshire Hathaway. That's the farthest, like that's the crazy, if that happened, I wouldn't even know what to think. Right? Like, I mean, that's so far away from Warren Buffett's playbook, but obviously he's got new young guns that are like, I mean, remember how long Warren faded Apple, right?
Yeah.
And then as like Charlie was kind of taking more of an advisory role, and Warren's, I mean, they're both were still involved, but he like kind of the day-to-day stuff and some of those investment decisions were being made by some younger guys that they kind of had groomed to be in these roles. Like the reason Berkshire Hathaway continued to outperform was because they got into Apple, whatever, how many years ago it was, 7-8 years ago. So, I mean, I think that would be a name that would I would be completely thunderstruck if that were to happen. Because at this point, I'm not surprised by the names that have entered. I mean, Larry Fink himself is sort of, I guess maybe a slightly more reasonable one besides would be Jamie Dimon. Like, that dude is still a hater, right? Like, I mean, he wants nothing to do with Bitcoin. He's still out there calling it a scam and so on and so forth. I just wonder how long, because at the end of the day, when you talk about any of these big institutions, these big, massive investment banks, like, how long are you not going to ride the train, right? Like, if your number one job to a shareholder is to make money, I mean, how do you fade it? How do you say, like, I don't want any part of this because I think it's a scam, right? I mean, it's if nothing else, again, this goes back to something I said earlier in the conversation, that has the cypherpunk dream died a little bit? Yeah, probably. I mean, I think that there are some people who hate the fact that there is, this institutional interest that's coming into the space and gobbling up all these digital assets. And we're on the heels. We're recording this conversation where we've had 3 of the biggest days of inflows, almost $1 billion every single day of the last 3 days in a row. And it's not going to stop, right? I mean, now you have the Cantor Fitzgerald, Jack Mallers, whatever thing with Tether, and they're coming with that Bitcoin 21 or whatever it's called. And, it's going to become an arms race, especially for Bitcoin. What I wonder in the long run, however, is how much will the speculative aspect of our industry die out? Because I think what we've seen is that the the era of easy money to be made in speculating in digital assets is probably long since gone, right? I mean, you guys have been around several cycles. Last cycle, 2021, there was roughly 20,000 tokens. I haven't looked at it today, but I guarantee you it's 13.5 million. The last time there was only a few months when I looked and it was like 10.1 million, and then it was like 13.5 million because of pump fund and everything else. And like people just come in, they get wrecked. They're like, this isn't for me. And a lot of times when I talk to family who's now starting to get curious, like, maybe you're right. Like, what is this digital asset stuff? I'm like, just buy Bitcoin. Don't mess with anything else. Like, literally just stay away from the rest of it. Because I think we're going to see all of block space in general become commoditized. I think we'll probably see a consolidation like we see in any other industry where some dominant chains. I mean, look at ETH. ETH is struggling. Like Solana is kind of come and eating its lunch a little bit. And that's not something that people would have predicted even just 2 years ago, and maybe that's part of the fragmentation of the L2 space and everything else. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting time to be alive. I'm glad to be in the industry when we are. I'm glad that people like you guys are out here having great conversations, doing this kind of educational outreach, getting people to just kind of think about what this space looks like both now and into the future. Yeah, interesting days ahead, and I'm glad to be part of the journey. It's crazy to me. I was a high school teacher for 20 years, right? Like I'm just a nerd. At the end of the day, I'm just a nerd who's like curious and asks questions, and I'm a friendly person. And that's the other thing. That the last thing I'll say, because I know we're probably getting close to the end of the time of our conversation, is that this is also the greatest space to be involved in because it is so egalitarian. If you have gumption, if you have moxie, if you have a good work ethic, you can just literally show up and just like talk to people and just like help them. And if you can provide value and not really necessarily expect anything in return immediately, doors of opportunity will open for you in ways that you will never even imagine. Right. So it's a great time to be alive, boys. And I'm glad to be in this space. And I can't thank you enough for having this conversation with me today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I totally agree with you. It is so much opportunity in the space just for those that want to put in the work and the learning to get that knowledge. But I did want you to touch on that a little bit. So it's interesting, like how you got your start. So maybe talk just a little bit how you go from being a teacher to where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, the easiest thing for me is to say, like, in hindsight, the reason why I've gotten to where I am is that teaching is an art. Teaching is something that gets shit on all the time in today's day and age. And let's just put aside what many perceive the education to have become, which I think there is a lot of truth to that. Is it as bad as like every school is a woke indoctrination palace? No, probably not, honestly. But I think at least for the last half of my career, it became about mining kids for data and testing and all this bullshit. It wasn't about like teaching kids how to think. It wasn't teaching kids how to like learn how to learn how to learn and learn how to love how to learn. So there is that, which has been a great conversation to have with people about AI, because educators in general are like, oh, AI is cheating. I'm like, no, you're thinking about that all wrong. Like if you have a kid who's is remotely autodidactic and likes learning, sit that kid in front of a chat GPT or a Grok and let them go to work, because that's just going to create a learning flywheel. They're going to be curious. They're going to ask questions. It's going to give them answers. They're going to go, look, what about this? And then it's amazing. So like, I think in that sense, it's going to be incredibly disruptive. I think it's going to have a huge impact on the education industry. But in my time in the classroom, what I learned is, and what has made me or helped me become successful in this industry, is I have a suite of soft skills that is very difficult for people to master, let alone have in the 21st century. Unfortunately, we've gotten to a point where like most people are like this all the time. They're just like, I'm staring at my phone. They're on their phone. They're like isolated. They're not, people don't know how to be present with each other anymore. Like one of the things I remember about meeting Ash, like he was super, like immediately like a laser beam. Like the minute I met this dude at a party, he was so real, like vibrant. You could feel it. Like people give off a vibe and energy. And when people are present and you're like looking people in the eye and you're just vibing and hitting on a crazy level and connecting and having a great conversation, that's what makes us human. And I think we're losing that ability. And it's really sad to say that, but I really think we're losing that ability. And I think across 20 years, what I learned is that even though I was in high school, right? Like they're still young adults. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be heard. everybody wants to have their ideas and their dreams validated. And I learned that across 2 decades. And so when I transitioned into Web3, it just became about being the same person I was as a teacher in a different context. Tell me about what you're building. Tell me about what you love about this space. Like, what drew you to this space? I just ask questions. Because if you ask questions and you just listen, people love that shit. Like that's all they want, right? And so I think being able, and I was a nerd, so I jumped around to a lot of different subjects. I started English, then I was social studies, then I did mathematics, then I was a new teacher mentor, then I was teaching theory of knowledge for IB. So, I mean, I ran the gamut. But the single strand that ran throughout all of that was me just constantly being curious, being a lifelong learner, and listening to people and being present with them, especially when they needed somebody, when they needed to just like vent or be heard or whatever. I think that is such a critical skill, and it's something that many people are missing out on in our first century, where everybody's so glued to their phones, and our time is. I mean, people now just don't even have dinner together anymore. It's weird. Like, I mean, maybe it's because I was a Gen Xer in the '80s, and just like Sunday, you'd sit around and have dinner, right? Like, and it's just like that whole culture is kind of just becoming fragmented and dissolving underneath us. And so I know this is a weird like philosophical answer getting all over the place, but I think that's really has helped me. And to answer your question more directly, Luke, I think what I would say to anybody, whether you're a teacher or not, you want to get into this space. I just had this conversation with somebody the other day. Think about the skills that you have and how to leverage them in the industry. Because again, that gets back to like, if you can show up and provide value. Like I talked to a guy who's in recruiting, and I said, listen, there's a ton of need. We need so many devs in the blockchain world. It's crazy. I said, so if he already does tech, I said, so, and he's into crypto. He's been into crypto. He's been in the space since 2017, like as a personal individual. I said, just start communicating with teams, go into Discords, go into Telegrams, meet people, chat them up, ask what they're doing, build relationships with devs, start building up a stable of candidates. Because then when you have teams that need like, we need a senior Solidity dev or whatever, and you're like, hey, I know a dude, right? Like I love introducing people. I love connecting people. I love just like, I have a skill where people will like, somebody asked me one time, do you know anybody at Arbitrum? I'm like, not a single soul. Give me 48 hours. And sure enough, like within a day and a half, I was in a group chat with like the head of partnerships at Off-Chain Labs, right? And that's the other cool thing about this industry is that it's so small. Like people don't realize how small our industry is. Like Ash knows it. Like, I don't know if you go to conferences, Luke, but you go around, you see the same people again and again. Even if you never knew that person's name, like I've seen that dude before. Like it just becomes a thing. It's almost like a meme unto itself. And so I think that openness lends itself to just the to your point, Luke, like just the endless opportunity. It's just an open field in Web3. And if you think of like, those tips about just taking a genuine interest in people and what they're doing in the space, that's going to lead to great conversations. It's going to lead to amazing relationships. And then things just flower from there. And that's the other thing too that's really weird about Web3. My wife doesn't, she's starting to understand it to an extent. And this gets back to Luke and I, where we were like college age and doing chat rooms and stuff. Like the friendships that form over distance on the internet is really weird. You almost feel stronger connections to people that you don't see day to day than you do with like the people that are in your general vicinity. It's kind of weird. But it's also wonderful in its own way too. So anyhow, that was a weird off the tangent philosophical answer. Hope that
Yeah, no, but it is so true. Like such a cool place to be. And it's like, I never in my life thought I'd be friends with so many Australians, but I am. I know several, actually funny enough, both from the Yahoo chat room days and today in Discord. So I guess whatever time I'm online just coincides with when Australians are online. But yeah, so it's just a fun place to be. But Ryan, this has been awesome, man. Really appreciate all your insights,
Yeah,
like, both from a personal perspective, but then also the cool stuff y'all are doing with Global Stake. So if folks want to stay in touch with the work that you're doing, both professionally, but then also just on your like Twitter and that kind of thing, how do they stay connected with you?
Yeah, so I mean, Global Stake, we're on. It's just globalstake.io is the website. If you're looking for us on X, it's global_stake. We're still trying to get our proper trademark so we can go to X and be like, yo, we want the actual just Global Stake, because it exists, but no one's even using it, which is weird. And then for me personally, this is also a funny story because a lot of people who are on the institutional side, they know me as Ryan Haczynski, very proper, right? But I'm the funky one, or just funky, or funk, or whatever people call me now. But that actually goes back to 1995, my AOL screen name, which was Funky Sid. And so when I came to Twitter back in January of 21, I wanted to do the whole pseudonymous thing. I'm like, oh, I don't want anybody to know me. So I didn't want to use Funky Sid, so I went with the Funky One. So that's actually how, so it's at the Funky with the number one. So that's still my handle on X, and I'm happy to chat with anybody. You can reach out, DM, connect with me. It's the same on Telegram too. So if you're listening or watching and you want to just hit me up on TG, it's also the Funky One there. And in Discord, it's spelled out, THEPHUNK1ONE, or not 1ONE, geez, ONE.
We're gonna include all that in the show notes, man. Like I think what I gotta say, man. Like likewise, meeting Ryan, you could just feel the energy. You could just feel like, dude, this guy's like you said, he's present, and you could just feel like you just get the good vibes, right? He's got Riz. Don't let the gray whiskers and like the hair and the fact that he's telling you that he's 50, because I know there's no visual component to this pod, but I'm like, bro, the guy's got Riz. Him and his wife are amazing. Like, they are fantastic. Just meeting them both, I was like, holy shit, this is great. You don't see very many couples in crypto. So it was great that you actually managed to get your wife to come to a crypto event. I can never do that with my wife. It's never, ever happening. But, man, thank you so very much for coming on here. And, yeah, dude, it's good to see people that have high energy and, like are really interested in talking to people around such a dry subject like infra typically, right? It's the exact type of personality you need to make this exciting. So thank you for coming on here and sharing, man. Like, I really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. It was really a great conversation. I don't think I've talked and laughed this much in a long time. So you guys are great hosts, and really appreciate the opportunity very much.
Thanks, dude.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the ATX DAO Podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. To learn more about ATX DAO, visit us at atxdao.com and follow us on X, Farcaster, and LinkedIn at ATX DAO. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.